Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about Square Enix, Final Fantasy Tactics, and some interesting news about some behind the scenes programming challenges that the team faced as they began to remaster this classic strategy RPG. I guess I want to chat about it because it makes me realize yet again that no matter how big a studio might be or how many people are involved or how dedicated they might be or how passionate the devs might be, human error and mistakes and procedures can sometimes cause long-term issues down the road. And so you can have people who are generally in good faith putting their all into a project, and then it's just, things kind of go sideways or something just happens that is considered to be normal. And then years later down the road, the devs or future devs who are new to the whole thing are like, wait a minute, what's happened here? So according to this Games Radar post by Nathan Walters, the title says, Square Enix finally ported Final Fantasy Tactics after its director played it for the first time in years. Then instantly ran into issues because no one had the source code anymore. And then the subtitle says, a classic strategy RPG comes back to life thanks to nostalgia, ingenuity, and a lot of late nights. Now, you might be thinking, how hard can it be to remake this game? Well, apparently it's harder than we thought, okay? This is crazy. All right. So, Walters writes, the return of Final Fantasy Tactics to modern consoles didn't happen through careful long-term planning. It all started with game director Kazutoyo Maihiro's nostalgic replay and a sudden realization that the game's building blocks were missing. So, Maihiro tells Square Enix in an interview, a few years ago, certain circumstances led me to play the original Final Fantasy Tactics game. It was my first time playing the game since it first released all those years ago, and I got to experience its brilliance all over again, from its outstanding design that still holds up today, even among modern games, to its deep narrative. Now, he goes on to say, however, there was no way to play the game on the current generation of consoles. I really wanted the younger generation of players who didn't get to experience the original release to be able to play this incredible game. That's why we started developing this title. So first off, my takeaway from this is that it's so fascinating how these creatives kind of go back to their old games and they're not like, you, brother, because I feel like that about my writing. But I guess he just felt really proud about what he created with his team, and he wanted to share it with a new generation of gamers. Now, do I think that, Gen Alpha or even some of the older ones, Gen Z, will particularly be chasing after all of this? I'm not so sure. But what I find so fascinating about this whole thing is that he's really sharing here some of his heart to, at least provide this game to people who might be interested in this. Now, what I also find so fascinating is that he is incredibly cognizant of how difficult it is these days to play some of these older games. It kind of reminds me of that whole stop killing games kind of movement that's being pushed forward by some major creators these days. And it reminds me that there are many games out there that have become almost like lost media or are incredibly difficult to play because if you aren't really savvy with an emulator, if you have any hangups about legality, you're going to be in trouble. You're not going to be able to play some oldie goldies. So it's really nice to see that some people are thinking, hey, we should bring this back. We should continue to make this available for people. So, it's time to bring out this game, dust it off, and present it again. Well, according to Walters, it wasn't so easy. With that, the team set out to bring Final Fantasy Tactics to a new audience, but almost immediately they hit a wall that no amount of technical know-how could fix. The building blocks of the game had simply vanished. There were a number of major challenges, but all of them stemmed from the fact that the master data and source code from the original game no longer existed, Mayhiro admits. Isn't that crazy? So, like, somewhere along the way, they'd lost the file. And I guess, like, if you asked me, like, do you have your original Adobe 6 files for the, anime music videos that you made, I would have to admit, no, I don't have them. So I can see how certain things can disappear over time. And he notes, that this was actually kind of normal. Walters writes, it wasn't about neglect, just a sign of the times. And Mayhiro explains, this isn't to say that they were mishandled or poorly managed or anything like that. Keeping that kind of data wasn't a normal thing to do at the time. In those days, we didn't have the sort of robust resource management tools that exist today. And on top of that, the production workflow of the game was such that the Japanese version was produced first, and then we would create localized versions by overwriting the data with that of other languages, including English. So isn't that kind of insane? So they didn't have the original files anymore. I guess nobody was able to or thought about the importance of copying and pasting. It was very, very, very different time, I guess. And honestly, I kind of understand, like, these things can happen, but it just goes to show you that big companies may have certain procedures that may make no sense to us and may even not make sense to them years and years down the road. So the article goes on to say, even patching or updating after release simply wasn't a thing. There was also no such thing as online patches or updates. So unless there was any major reason to do something different, once you made a game, that was it. It all added to a perfect storm, a beloved game ready for a comeback, but without a technical foundation to build on. So Mayhiro says, so I think it's fair to say that developing this game without any master data or source code was the biggest challenge. Insane. Crazy. But they were dedicated. So Mayhiro laughs, apparently, and says they solved the problem, he writes, put simply, by sheer force. We analyzed a number of existing versions of the game and reconstructed the programming of the original, but there were also times where we played the original and it worked out by feel alone. The entire process was the result of cumulative hard work. On the one hand, working to implement new features, while behind the scenes our work was similar to porting an old arcade game to the NES. The staff who worked on this game were real lifesavers. I can't thank them enough. Walters ends this article with, so the next time you load up Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, on a modern console, remember, it's more than just a port. It's a labor of love, built piece by piece from the ground up, driven by a director's rediscovered passion and a team that simply refused to give up, even when the original map was nowhere to be found. Now, for those of you who might be curious, the team that is in question here is actually Creative Studios 3. So the same team that helped remaster this also did Final Fantasy XIV. So if we're thinking about, gee, what are the people working on Final Fantasy XIV doing as well on the side, this is one of the things that they were working on. And of course, that gets me thinking about, how is management using their resources, particularly their people. Recently Yoshi P said that they didn't put in a Savage tier for the Occult Crescent raid, I believe, and his off the cuff kind of response was it was too costly. Well, you gotta wonder, like, okay, it was too costly to do that, but we can spend the manpower to to remake a tactics game. Yeah, it's got me scratching my noggin here. So anyway, I guess I find this story so fascinating for a variety of reasons. The first, of course, being that Tactics, which is a very, very old game, might have a renewed audience given how more and more JRPGs are becoming popular. So I understand why Square Enix would like to go back to all of its older games, update them for newer hardware, and push them out. We've already been seeing some beautiful remasters of the original, five Final Fantasy titles, and we're starting to see remasters of other various Final Fantasy titles. I imagine we're going to see remasters of the whole flagship series, excepting probably Final Fantasy XI, although I think the graphical update for Final Fantasy XIV was very welcome. I don't think it's going to probably happen to Final Fantasy XI, let's be real. Although, maybe if they did, more people might be interested in going back to an older MMO that's still viable to play, more or less. Question mark? I don't know. But anyhow, all this to say, I find it's great to hear that they are invested in ensuring that their titles are still accessible for modern consoles and for modern players. But what is also fascinating is that it was not so simple for them to just kind of slap a new coat of paint on there and, push it out. They're adding voice lines, they're tweaking some sentences so it sounds better when spoken. And on top of all of this, they had to do it largely remaking chunks of the code that were missing, I suppose. I'm guessing they had to reverse engineer stuff or something. So it sounds like it was actually not as simple as I'd initially thought when I saw the trailer. And so then that gets me thinking about how Creative Studio 3 is being used and how this could affect development on Final Fantasy XIV. I just wonder. I'm just curious. Like, who did they pull aside? And I need to make it very clear that I don't want to blame the devs in this situation. You work for a studio, word comes from on high, you got to go do this other thing. You're not going to sit around and start, lipping off at the boss. I totally get it. But it does make me wonder how resources are being used within Square Enix if they are, coming in and rearranging teams between the various development studios. Like, I don't know. I don't like accusing people of stuff, but if you put the word Creative Studio 3 on your trailer, I'm going to start thinking, wait a minute. So the Final Fantasy XIV staff were working on this as well as Final Fantasy XIV. Is that why ... fill in the blank? So anyway, very fascinating story. It kind of opens a little window into the challenges of game development and just how corporate or development procedures can long-term bite you in the butt if you aren't really cognizant of the far distant future, I suppose. This could happen to anyone. So anyway, that's about it. Let me know down in the comments below if you were more excited because Tactics is coming out and, Creative Studio 3 was in charge of it. Are you excited? How much do you think this whole situation potentially impacted Final Fantasy XIV, given that Creative Studio 3 was involved in it? Or perhaps I was wrong and I was just, imagining seeing Creative Studio 3 in the trailer. But anyway, let me know down in the comments below and I'll see you all next time.